Would you dare to open a hidden freezer at the end of an underground tunnel? It sounds far-fetched, but for someone, this choice unearthed one of the most disturbing moments of their life. Inside the freezer, bags labeled with full names and a smell that seemed to scream for attention told a story that was never meant to be uncovered. This is the essence of a discovery that transcends ordinary fear, plunging into an abyss of secrets that defy logic and morality. Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we dive into this chilling story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue bringing eerie secrets to you. Are you ready to uncover what lies behind a door that was never meant to be opened? The luxury we see in the mansions of the world's most powerful people is just a superficial layer. Behind the pristine walls, there are secrets that should never be revealed. This story is not just terrifying, it's deeply revealing. It's an account that forces us to question the true nature of power and what it hides. Those who hear this story will likely never see the world the same way again. There are places where money and influence create perfect masks to conceal the unspeakable. What happened in that mansion was more than a simple accident or an exaggerated party story. It was the discovery of something bigger, darker, and more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Every detail of this story leads to questions without simple answers. What do the names on the bags mean? Who placed them there and why? And most disturbingly of all, how is it possible for something so macabre to remain hidden? This story reminds us that the world is far more complex than it appears on the surface. If you were confronted with this scene, what would you do? Would you have the courage to keep investigating or shut the door and pretend nothing happened? Curiosity can take us far, but it can also open doors that should never be opened. This story is an invitation to explore the unknown, but also a warning. Not all mysteries should be unveiled. Elite cleaner. The idea of being an elite cleaner might seem glamorous to outsiders. See, the glamour is just the tip of the iceberg. The dirt you encounter in this line of work is a different story, and sometimes it's not the physical mess that's most unsettling. Working in luxurious mansions, surrounded by designer furniture, dazzling chandeliers, and million-dollar artworks. It sounds like a peaceful job, steeped in comfort and sophistication. But the reality is quite different. The sparkle and glamour are just a facade. The mess hidden behind it is the real challenge. The job goes far beyond cleaning. It's about erasing traces, undoing stories that were never meant to be told. Finding syringes, drug remnants, compromisingly intimate items, and even abandoned exotic animals isn't unusual. All left behind by people who prefer their actions to remain anonymous. Every item found seems to tell a story that will never be revealed. Over time, you learn not to ask questions. Silence is the greatest virtue in this line of work. The less you question, the safer you are. But even without asking, it's impossible not to absorb what you see. The scenes, smells, and details become etched in your memory, turning each job into an emotional weight that accumulates over the years. Cleaning these places isn't just a physical task, but also a psychological one. Every environment carries an energy, an invisible story that seems to cling to you. The opulence of mansions hides realities, so dark it's impossible to imagine without being there. Luxury often serves as a mask for something far more disturbing. This job reveals an uncomfortable truth. Those who have the most often have the most to hide. These are people living on the edge, pushing their actions into dangerous territories, knowing there's someone to clean up after them. But even the most well-hidden marks leave traces, and those traces can tell stories no one should ever know. The call for a special job. It all started with a call that seemed routine, but the tone of my boss's voice made it clear something was off. He rarely called personally, and when he did, it was always with direct instructions. No questions, no curiosity. Just get the job done. Those words should have been enough to warn me, but the payment offered was too high to refuse. The mansion was in Beverly Hills, a place I knew well. It belonged to an entertainment icon known for extravagant parties and swirling rumors. Upon arrival, the scene was familiar: overturned furniture, broken bottles, and the unmistakable smell of something stronger than cigarettes. But there was something different in the air, something I couldn't identify right away. The energy in that house was heavy, almost suffocating. The brilliance of the chandeliers and the grandeur of the furniture couldn't mask the discomfort I felt. It was as if something was wrong, something that didn't belong in that place. Even without knowing what it was, I knew this wouldn't be a typical cleanup. My instruction was clear: take care of the basement. This rarely happened, and when it did, it usually meant something more serious needed to be erased. As I descended the stairs, I noticed the smell changing. The air became denser, and the feeling of unease grew with each step. The staircase felt longer than it should, as if I were descending into another world. Upon reaching the basement, what I found left me paralyzed. It wasn't just the typical chaos of an over-the-top party. The space bore marks, signs that something much worse had happened there. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but something stronger, perhaps curiosity or stubbornness, pushed me to continue. The basement. Descending the stairs to the basement, the first thing I noticed was the change in atmosphere. Now tell me, when has going into a basement in a story like this ever gone well? Just the description alone is enough to send shivers down your spine. The air felt heavier, damp, and the smell was nearly unbearable. The light from the rest of the house didn't reach here. The only illumination came from a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting distorted shadows that danced with the slightest movement. It was as if this space didn't belong to the same reality as the floors above. The room was larger than I expected. Old furniture was piled haphazardly in one corner, while the floor was littered with broken bottles and dark stains I couldn't identify. But what caught my attention the most were the walls. They were covered in deep scratches, as if something or someone had desperately tried to escape. The scratches didn't look natural. Some were thin, made by something that resembled human nails. Others were wide and deep, as if a tremendous force had torn into the concrete. The sight was so disturbing that, for a moment, I wondered if I should continue. But the drive to complete the job overrode my hesitation, and I pressed on. While cleaning near the bar, I noticed something odd. One of the wooden panels was misaligned, as if it were hiding something. When I touched it, I heard a faint click, and the panel slid aside, revealing a trapdoor. My heart raced, and my mind wavered between curiosity and fear. The trapdoor was heavy, with rusty hinges that groaned loudly as I opened it. An even stronger smell wafted up, a mix of mold, rust, and something sweet I couldn't identify. I grabbed my flashlight and, without thinking much, began descending the iron ladder leading to an even deeper tunnel. Each step felt like a challenge, and the sensation of being watched was almost unbearable. The tunnel and the first signs of horror. The tunnel was narrow, with rough concrete walls and an oppressive feeling that seemed to envelop me. With every step, the smell grew stronger, a mix of mold, iron, and something decayed that clung to the throat. The beam of the flashlight illuminated only a few feet ahead, and the shadows dancing on the walls seemed to move on their own. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the sound of my own footsteps, echoing disturbingly. The tunnel walls were marked by scratches, deep and irregular. Some were thin, as if made by human nails, while others were wide, almost impossible to imagine. It was evident that something or someone had tried to escape this place, but without success. The intensity of the marks reflected a desperation that quickened my breath. Each step grew harder than the last, as if the tunnel was trying to swallow me whole. After walking for a few minutes, the tunnel forked. To the left, a corridor plunged into absolute darkness, seemingly endless. To the right, a rusted metal door with a small circular window at the top caught my attention. The glass was stained, and dark trails streaked down its surface, forming dried pools on the floor. The smell was strongest here, almost unbearable. My mind knew what those stains were, but I refused to acknowledge it. I approached the door hesitantly, feeling my heart race faster with each step. I touched the cold handle, which seemed to resist my grip. With a push, the door creaked open slowly, emitting a squeal that echoed unsettlingly through the tunnel. Beyond it, a small room dimly lit by a weak light revealed a scene that froze me in place. In the center of the room was a large industrial freezer, metallic and scarred with deep scratches covering its surface. A freezer scratched from the inside out. Just that detail is enough to make a horror movie. But hold on, the scariest part is still to come. What disturbed me the most was that the scratches came from the inside out. There was no doubt something had tried to escape. Around it, metal shelves were filled with plastic bags labeled with names. Each name was handwritten, in hurried, uneven letters: Thomas G., Rebecca F., Mark W. They weren't codes or numbers. They were full names, as if they were part of a macabre inventory. I hesitantly picked up one of the bags. The cold, damp texture was repulsive, but what I saw inside was even worse. Flesh, or something that resembled it, veined with dark streaks and colors that shifted from red to grayish yellow. I replaced the bag and backed away, feeling my stomach turn. The freezer room. The room seemed small, but the presence emanating from that place was overwhelming. The The freezer at its center dominated the space with its imposing metallic form. The marks on its surface told a disturbing story. Something or someone had been trapped inside and desperately tried to escape. But what could have left those marks? My mind struggled to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The shelves around the room were meticulously organized, filled with plastic bags and labeled boxes. Each bag bore a full name, handwritten, as if part of a record. When I picked one up, I felt the cold, damp plastic in my hands. Its contents were even more unsettling. It looked like flesh, but something was wrong. The colors, textures, and the dark veins running through it. I knew it wasn't normal. I quickly returned the bag and backed away, trying to suppress the nausea rising in my chest. My gaze was drawn to the walls of the room, where a corkboard was filled with photographs. I immediately recognized some of the faces: politicians, businessmen, and celebrities who had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. Their expressions were the most disturbing part. It wasn't pain or fear. It was absolute emptiness, as if they no longer had souls. In the corner of the board, a note pinned with a tack caught my attention. The paper was yellowed, and the handwriting was hurried and slanted. Only 3 words were written: "For guests only." Those words seemed both a warning and a provocation. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I looked again at the freezer. Something inside me said I needed to open it, but my mind screamed for me to run. With trembling hands, I grasped the latch and pulled. The sound was like a metallic scream that echoed throughout the room. Inside the freezer, more bags were piled up, labeled with the same names. The sight was enough to make me step back, but I knew there was more to uncover in that place. The smell emanating from the freezer was so strong it felt alive. It was a stench of death and decay that would never leave my mind. What I found there was just the beginning of a much larger mystery. Everything in that place seemed part of something planned, something I couldn't yet comprehend, but was already consuming me. The ritualistic room. I left the freezer room, trying to push away the disturbing images now etched into my memory. I continued down the tunnel, each step more hesitant than the last. The air seemed heavier, almost tangible, and the smell now included something even stranger, like burnt wax mixed with charred meat. That was when the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and what I saw made me question whether I was still in reality. The walls were covered in symbols drawn in a dark red hue that appeared to have dried over time. When symbols appear, you already know something much bigger is at play. And I'm talking about something not from this realm. Ritualistic or not, it always gives an atmosphere that feels alive, doesn't it? Curved lines, circles, and indecipherable patterns spread across every surface. The drawings had their own energy, almost as if they pulsed faintly in the flickering light of my flashlight. They weren't mere marks, they were something ritualistic, charged with an intention that felt alive. At the center of the room was a large, heavy table made of ancient, worn wood. On it lay a collection of objects straight out of a nightmare. Curved knives were perfectly aligned, some with dried stains resembling blood. Melted candles formed grotesque, almost human-like figures, and ancient books lay with cracked leather covers. Even without opening them, I knew they contained words not meant for ordinary eyes. What disturbed me most were the cages mounted on the walls at the back of the room. They were too small for adults, but large enough for something alive. Inside, nail marks were deeply etched into the metal, as if someone or something had tried to escape. Chains dangled from the cages, and beneath them, dark, dried stains confirmed the worst. Blood, lots of blood. I looked at the floor around the table and saw circular marks scorched into the concrete. They resembled burn patterns, arranged in precise layouts, as if part of a ritual. Each circle was connected to another, forming something larger than a simple drawing. The sense that this place had been the site of something indescribable was overwhelming, and my breathing grew ragged. It was impossible to ignore that this place carried a presence. It wasn't just the weight of what I was seeing, but a clear sense that something was watching me. The room's energy felt alive, and I knew I needed to leave before it was too late. Yet deep down, I felt the room didn't want to let me go. The return and the lingering fear. My decision to leave was immediate, but every step back up the tunnel felt harder than the last. The air was heavier, almost suffocating, and the absolute silence was broken by a low, unsettling sound. It was like metal being dragged across the floor, coming from behind me. My mind screamed not to look back, but my curiosity, mixed with fear, was almost unbearable. My flashlight started to falter. The light flickered, casting shadows on the walls that seemed to come to life. The scratches on the walls, which had been merely unsettling before, now appeared to move as the beam of light flickered. The sensation of being watched grew so strong that my skin crawled, and every cell in my body urged me to run. When I finally saw the stairs leading back to the basement, I felt a momentary relief, but it was quickly replaced by panic. The iron steps seemed taller than before, and the sound of my footsteps echoed ominously through the tunnel. It was as if something was pushing me up and out, but at the same time pulling me back. When I reached the basement, the atmosphere seemed different. It wasn't just a cluttered, stuffy space as it had been before. Now it felt charged with the same energy as the tunnel, as if something had escaped and come up with me. The dim light bulb flickered, and every sound seemed amplified. I wanted to finish the job as quickly as possible and leave that house, but my hands were shaking so much that I could barely focus. I climbed back to the main floor of the mansion, where the sunlight seemed to bring temporary relief. But something was off. The house was eerily quiet, more so than it should have been. Even with the other cleaners present, the atmosphere felt empty, as if everyone's spirit had been drained. I finished the job without saying a word to anyone, just trying to appear normal. When I finally left the mansion, I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air like a blessing. But as I looked back, I saw the lights still on and felt that something from that house was still with me. It was as if I had brought part of that place with me, and I knew that, no matter how far I ran, that moment would haunt me forever. The revelation of being watched. The next morning, I tried convincing myself it had all been a nightmare. Classic. You try to convince yourself it's all in your head, but reality always finds a way to show you that the nightmare is wide awake. But my attempt to rationalize was interrupted when I looked out the window. A black SUV was parked across the street. It was an ordinary car, but there was something strange about it. The tinted windows hid the interior, and it didn't move, even after hours. I went out to run errands, thinking I was just imagining things. But when I returned, the SUV was still there, in the same spot. The idea of being followed started to take root in my mind, and the discomfort quickly grew. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. They were watching me, but why? That night, as I tried to sleep, my phone rang. The number was unknown, but against my better judgment, I answered. On the other end, a calm, emotionless voice said, "Thank you for your work. Our clients value privacy." Before I could respond, the call ended. The silence that followed was worse than any words. In the days that followed, the feeling of being followed intensified. Footsteps behind me on empty streets, lingering glances that seemed to last too long, and the SUV, now appearing in different locations, always nearby. I started noticing patterns, but didn't know what to do. Each day, my paranoia grew, and my sanity seemed to slip further away. The faces from the photos on the corkboard began haunting me, appearing in every corner of my mind. I recognized some from old news stories, all connected to scandals hushed up, disappearances, or mysterious deaths. Everything pointed to something larger, something I couldn't fully grasp. The final confirmation that I was being watched came in the form of an envelope pinned to my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just 3 words: "Tell no one." It was the warning I needed, but not the one I wanted. They knew I had seen something that should never have been discovered. The decline into insanity. After the note, I realized my life would never be the same. Every night, I woke up with the feeling that there was something or someone in my room watching me. Even in public places, the feeling of being followed never went away. I started avoiding crowded streets, constantly looking over my shoulder, and keeping all the windows in my house shut. But nothing seemed enough to protect me. The nightmares became a constant. I dreamed of the tunnel, the freezer, and the photos. In my dreams, the faces from the photos came to life, but not in a human way. Their empty expressions haunted me, and they whispered words I couldn't understand. I woke up drenched in sweat, with the smell of the tunnel still clinging to my nostrils, as if I had never left. My attempts to rationalize what I had seen only deepened the mystery. I researched the names on the labels and the faces from the photos, and all I found were connections to suspicious deaths, disappearances, and hushed-up scandals. These were people who had simply vanished, and what I discovered confirmed that the freezer and the labels weren't random. It was all part of a plan. The black SUV kept appearing. It never approached, never did anything, but its presence was constant. A silent reminder that I wasn't alone and that, at any moment, I could disappear like the names on those bags. Anonymous calls became frequent, but they were always silent. It was as if the weight of the silence itself was a greater threat than any words could be. I started doubting my sanity. Sometimes I saw shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned my head, there was nothing. Muffled sounds, like voices, echoed through my house at night. My paranoia grew with each passing day, and I felt like I was on the brink of losing control. The feeling of being watched was constant, and my mind remained in a state of permanent alert. The breaking point came when I found another note on my door with the same 3 words: "Tell no one." They knew I was still trying to understand what I had seen, and this was the final warning. I understood that I had to leave, abandon everything and start over, far away from any connection to that job or that mansion. The escape and unanswered questions. I decided to move far away, to a small town where no one knew me. I quit my job and sold almost everything I owned, hoping that distance would be enough to protect me. At first, the move seemed to work. The town was quiet, and I felt an almost immediate sense of relief. But it didn't take long for me to realize that distance didn't mean safety. It didn't take long for black SUVs to start appearing again. They didn't park near my house, but I saw them on the streets, following the same routes as me or stationed at strategic locations. There was never any direct confrontation, but their presence was enough to remind me that I wasn't truly free. The nights remained tormenting. My nightmares grew more vivid, and now, upon waking, I felt as though something had been in my room with me. The air felt heavier, and sometimes I heard footsteps outside, though no one was ever there. The symbols from the ritualistic room were engraved in my mind, and it felt like, even from afar, they still had an effect on me. I began to wonder why they had let me live. They could have easily gotten rid of me, as they probably had with others. Was I insignificant enough not to be a threat? Or were they just waiting for the right moment to act? The uncertainty was almost as torturous as the fear itself. Even with the distance, my mind kept trying to piece together the puzzle. The burnt circles on the floor, the photos of the missing people, the labels on the bags, it all seemed connected to something far larger than I could comprehend. The mansion wasn't just a physical place, but a nexus to something ancient, darker, and far more powerful. I had abandoned my old life, but the shadows of that place still followed me. No matter how hard I tried to forget, what I saw and felt in that tunnel was etched into me. I knew I would never truly be safe, and that, at any moment, I could be consumed by the same forces that had taken those names on the labels. The end. Even now, far from that mansion, I still wonder what really happened. Each day, the feeling of being watched persists, and the black SUVs keep appearing in unexpected places. I can't escape the thought that I'm still being monitored, perhaps waiting for the moment I make the mistake of saying too much. The freezer, the labels with names, the photos on the walls, everything was part of something far greater than a simple crime. It was something meticulously planned, a ritual that transcended the physical and delved into the supernatural. The symbols, the burnt circles on the floor, and the objects on the table weren't just decorative. They carried a purpose I could never fully understand. What scares me the most isn't what I've already seen, but what I still don't comprehend. The empty faces in the photos, the scratches on the freezer, and the blood-stained cages pointed to something beyond human comprehension. It was as if that mansion was a portal to forces much older, darker, and far more dangerous than I could imagine. Even with all the distance, I feel like I'll never truly be free. The silence of the calls, the stares from the SUVs, and the recurring nightmares are a constant reminder that that place is still watching me, even from afar. The tunnel, the freezer, and the rituals weren't an end in themselves, but just part of something larger, something still in motion. The question that haunts me the most is, why did they let me live? That's the question that never has a clear answer. Maybe silence is more useful to them than your absence. But can you live with that? Was my silence enough to guarantee my safety? Or are they just waiting for the right moment to erase me? The doubt is as paralyzing as the fear itself, and the sense of teetering on the brink of collapse never goes away. This story is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. If you too have begun to see the patterns, share this story. More voices mean a better chance of understanding what truly happens in the shadows. Because what we don't know might be far more terrifying than any nightmare we can imagine. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this mystery captivated you. But I bet you haven't seen everything yet. Click on the next videos now to continue your journey into the unknown. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next secrets I'm about to reveal. But be careful, once you step inside, there's no turning back.